Yeah, thank you very much, Christoph, and thanks for the invitation to speak at the Eurasia Pack event. I'm really grateful I'm here to present a slightly different view, but on a very similar topic. And this is probably a bit confusing because I'll be talking with a different project in mind that we have. It's also a European project, and it primarily deals with Singapore and Australia, but it has a small part which also deals with New Zealand, and that's the part, obviously, which I'm going to talk about. I'm also glad that I've been visiting New Zealand last year and got a chance to spend a month traveling around, because I'm not sure that I'll be allowed into the country after this presentation again. But we'll see. There are still parts where there are no ICT universities. So what I'm going to present to you is the results of an analysis that we did of New Zealand ICT research capabilities. And I'll talk a little bit more about the caveats, of course, obviously, that you have to take into account when you're doing that from abroad. Just a few words about the projects. There are 4 partners in our projects. Optimat, Ian Morgan is here. He represents a UK-based technology strategy consultancy. There is NICTA from Australia, that I'm sure most of you will know. There's also Singapore Management University in the project, and UTIMA. We are an RTD strategy consultancy based in Vienna in Austria. We do a lot of work for the European Commission, but also for ministries, also industry and universities. And the strategic context in which this project is placed is the decreasing share of European or the decreasing European share that Europe has in international RTD. That's actually nothing so surprising, because it's entirely due to the increasing RTD engagement and investment in countries such as Brazil, India, and China. So it's all other countries basically are losing out, and that's of course one of the motivations why this international collaboration is important. But there is, and that's just something I wanted to point out, there is a wide range of different reasons why people engage in international collaboration. One is, of course, as Kai mentioned, and as was mentioned just in the presentation before, is that you're looking for excellence. You're looking for excellent partners all over the world. So that's mostly the academic peer-to-peer motivation. But then there is also the motivation of industry to look for new markets, and collaboration in research is often a precursor to that. It's often something to get a foot into the door and to open a new market. And then there are very different challenges. They range from obviously distance to cultural differences. There are funding differences. There is the IPR and legal systems. Finally, it's very difficult to get in touch with the right networks and making the right contacts. So these are sort of universals, and I would like to emphasize that there's not just one reason for collaboration, but there are actually many different reasons. Looking at it from a strategic ICT RTD context, ICT is important because it obviously can help the world to tackle some of the very big challenges that we are facing. And Europe has, of course, recognized this, as have other countries, such as Australia and certainly New Zealand as well. And we need breakthroughs also in ICT to be able to actually tackle these challenges. But while the challenges are not, let's say, unique to the countries, certainly the solutions aren't either, which means we need to work together. And I think this is increasingly recognized by policymakers around the globe. And that also means there is an increasing awareness of this need for international collaboration. And these are just some points as they have been formulated by David Skellin in his presentation to the IST Advisory Group in Europe, which is a very influential group that basically has a decision also on the framework program of the European Union. And it just points us to the fact that increasingly also this international collaboration, which always was important, but it's probably going to be even more important in the future in the 8th framework program. In this project, we are trying to develop strategies for international collaboration, and our emphasis is on Singapore and Australia, but as I said, we also recommend something about New Zealand to the European Commission, and I don't want to go through all of these points, but we operate on two different levels. One is the area of the policies, and one is the area of the researchers themselves. So we try to give recommendations both to the policy level, but also to the researchers. Some of the lessons learned when looking into past collaborations are that it's very important that partners have shared objectives and mutual benefit. We always have this characteristic in academic collaboration that there is peer-to-peer cooperation going on, which is important because this drives the collaboration. However, we've also seen that the really fruitful collaborations come from those projects where it goes beyond just peer-to-peer cooperation, where some longer-term relationship can be established, where there is sustainability. But that is very difficult to achieve, and it's not usually something that happens just by itself. It needs the right environment, it needs the right interest, it also needs the right kind of support. Despite of the fact that we all know that ICT nicely supports communication over long distances, but distance still is a challenge. And certainly me saying this here is probably preaching to the converted, but I mean, you still need to have the stamina to collaborate over long periods of time. And there are better ways of doing this than just doing this by exchange of email. It's always a good idea, for example, to have people come and visit you and doing exchange visits. But again, it's not so easy doing this over longer periods and doing this in a sustainable fashion. It's also important to recognize that public policies are very different in different countries. And this in particular also concerns the conditions for funding. And while we all in this room, we may share this perception that international collaboration is important and fruitful, it may be much more difficult for policymakers to defend the public spending of money for international collaboration to their communities. It's always the number one question: why do we give money for international collaboration? So it's understandable for us, and it's clear to us, but it's probably not as understandable for the people actually voting for your politicians. So what we've done is, in trying to analyze a bit better what the ICT RTD scene here in New Zealand looks, we tried to first get an overview. In a country such as New Zealand, that is, at least I would say, feasible from the outside by simply looking at, well, who are the researchers and what are they doing? What are the research groups? So what we did is we basically did an extensive internet research of all the ICT research groups in the country. So if you don't have a web page, you're not included in this study. I'm sorry. But for ICT research, I should say this is very rare, although I think it may have happened in a couple of cases. We then looked, of course, what you do, the natural thing to do is in citations, but we're not just counting citations, we actually looked at H factors. H factor is a specific measure which helps to better than just counting citations assess productivity and potential impact of a researcher. Basically, if you have an H factor of 7, it means that you have at least 7 publications which are cited at least 7 times. Okay? So it measures both productivity and impact, and this is why many people suggest this to be a good measure. But we are not so much interested in the absolute values, I should say, neither of the citations nor of the H factors. What we're really interested in is to see, are there any strengths, are there any clusters where we see particularly good researchers or good groups. So we also averaged over groups of researchers within university groups for H factors and for citations. And basically the results, and I'll show just some tops of the list here, are as follows. So we did this for individual researchers. So this is our top list of researchers in universities. It ranges basically from Ian Witten at Waikato here to Mark Gotting, and then of course there are many others. And this of course here is ranked by age index, and you can also see, well, actually in this case it's quite uniform also. Well, there are some, for example, Desmond Taylor would be ranked after Ajit Narayanan, if you would only count citations. Okay, this is one way of looking at the data, by simply looking at who are the outstanding ICT researchers in this country. Much more interesting from our point of view is, however, what are the groups? Why is groups interesting? Groups is interesting because when you are trying to set priorities, of course, you're not just looking into who is one single outstanding research in a country, but you're actually interested in, so where is a group that has critical mass that you can really recommend for doing something. And then you see here the results, which is now averaged over groups. However, in order to assess this correctly, you always would have to take into account the number of staff in the calculation. And you see this, sometimes it's one, which of course means basically we just have a single researcher there that is in our list. So that of course needs to be also questioned and double checked. But again, this is the raw data more or less. So top of the list with very good average age indices and average citation values are the University of Waikato, the University of Auckland, 4 groups, and that's the really interesting information, such as machine learning. The Center for E-Research is only described with 1 person, and parallel programming research groups, and so on and so forth. And I think here already there are some topics emerging that have also been mentioned before, such as graphics and vision, the Center for Bioinformatics, very interesting from my point of view, the Department of Computer Science, Software Engineering, Robotics. So I think there is a picture emerging, and when you continue looking at these groups by citations, so this is now a different order, it's now sorted by citations. Again, you have very strong groups at the University of Waikato, Center for E-Research, Graphics and Vision. It looks very similar. In the end, I really would suggest it's not very useful to look at this figure by figure, because there are too many problems associated with such an analysis. So I give you a simple example. It's nearly impossible to calculate age figures for somebody who's named Paul Smith, unless you are Paul Smith yourself and you're able to identify all your publications clearly. It's even worse if your name is Wu Li. So that's nearly impossible. But I do think from what we have done, and then when we take a more holistic look at all the groups and all the individuals, there is a picture emerging which looks as follows. So based on our analysis, it appears that New Zealand ICT researchers are particularly strong in areas such as artificial intelligence, or to be more precise, machine learning is an outstanding area, cognitive science and bioinformatics, which I'm not sure this is really one topic, but these are certainly two, let's say it's 2 areas that seem to be very strong. Human-computer interaction is a field that is very strong, and it's a question whether you would include also all this graphical computing here. And then software engineering. And then there are further strengths in distributed systems, such as grid and parallel computing, and wireless and ultra-wideband systems. What we then did in our study is we tried to make a correspondence between these areas and areas in the European Union's framework program, and to see where would these strengths best fit in. And there is a number of areas ranging from intelligent information management, language technologies, ICT for learning, cognitive systems, neurocomputation, and so on, that are mentioned in the European Union's framework program as priority topics. I should say this is the current version, this is FP7, there will be a new program soon, which is FP8, but typically framework programs are relatively similar between each other, so we can expect that similar topics will also be present there. So there should be plenty of opportunities to collaborate in these priority areas. And I think I would like to also show how this could be used in the future is basically by identifying some areas where we believe, so there are some larger groups which very good background competencies, and there are some outstanding researchers, and there are some topics they are interested in, and there are corresponding topics in the EU. So this is more or less how this could be used in the future. But I would really caution you that this is, let's say, this is really the first draft that I'm presenting here, and I'm fully aware this needs to be checked, and one of the purposes of me being here is actually doing this. Okay, thank you.